was kind of hoping that I was done having to do this kind of thing.
Sorry, Jean.
Yeah, and then Kumi approached me and I thought, well, what would I say? And, you know, it has been a real journey. And there was somebody I was talking to, oh, I know, a new business person in Sisters, and she went to this class to learn how to be an entrepreneur. And I thought about that through the years, and she said, well, what did you do when times were really hard? And I said, I figured out something else to do. And I think there are ups and downs when you're in business and when you're in business for yourself. And I certainly, when I started out, I didn't even know I was going to do a quilt show, you know. So it isn't like that was, I'm going to do this and this and this. I was just doing something I loved. And I think through the years, what has held everything together is that spirit of creativity. And I think when you feel that about what you're doing, you find a way to keep doing it. But you also have to punt sometimes. And you have to find new ways to do things. And we've certainly changed things up. And it was probably 6 months before Quilt Show. Dawn and I were having a little meeting, and we meet up and just kind of talk about things in general. And I said, you know what, Dawn? As soon as this is over, we need to start brainstorming for the next 10 years. And you know, I knew we had this one under our belt, but you want to think, well, we have an opportunity. We don't have to always do things the same way we've done it before. And I ran my business that way, and that's what I like about quilting and about this whole sort of thing that we're involved in, is that you really have to be open to new ideas. What was really probably the hardest thing for me was wrapping my head around, what does 50 years mean? And C&T approached me a couple of years ago about doing a book, and I really wanted to say no, because I had done 30 books and that was really enough. But I knew it wasn't a how-to book. I wasn't going to have to figure out all the math on how to put a quilt together, because I didn't want to do that anymore. So I, had to go back, and really I went through all of my memorabilia that I have and made a big outline. And so it got me in touch with a lot of things that I haven't even thought about in years. And so that whole process of writing the book and putting it together, and Dawn and Val worked with me on a lot of this. They did a lot of the legwork, and I couldn't have done it without them. Because Val took everybody who'd ever taught at Quilter's Affair and sent them a letter and told them what it was, and then invited them, if they were interested, to send us a story or whatever. And when those came in, all of a sudden reality really started hitting about what this was going to be like. But I don't know when it was last spring, and I still am thinking, what does 50 years mean? And I said something to Val, and she said, well, Mom, I was 1.5 years when you opened the store. And I thought, it was her whole life, and my son was 5.5. So it's right in front of me. That's 50 years. So it became a reality. And in thinking about everything leading up to the show, I really found it was the storytelling that I was really enjoying, and I tried to capture that when we did the book. And then right before Quilt Show, when Quilters Affair did their program, and then Quilt Show did their fundraiser program the next night, and I know the two groups worked together to make sure they didn't repeat each other, but those 2 nights became really, really special to me, and I think it's because I felt like all of you kind of people who've been here through it were the ones I got to see. On Quilt Show Day, it just blows up, as you know. But I was more in touch knowing people on those 2 nights. And both groups really focused on storytelling, but in different ways. And so those were just really, really special for me. And then when it came to Quilt Show Day, my son, he's older than Val, 4 years older, but he has been coming to Quilt Show forever, and he hangs quilts. And now my grandson hangs quilts. And he came to me and he said, "Mom, I want my family to hang all of your quilts." And Kumi and Don and the committee that does special exhibits, we put together what they wanted me to show. And I really wanted to show my samplers that I did in the very early years of having, when I was teaching, and teaching samplers at the store, and I have 28 of them. And there's one that's kind of been used, but the rest of them haven't been used, and they're just upstairs on shelf. And so picked those out. And then the other thing was to do a retrospective from the very beginning with the quilt. The very first quilt I made was for when I was pregnant with Jason, and it's just a little quilt this big with a teddy bear on it. And I was in the Embroiders Guild in Portland, and Jean Ray Laurie, who was a very well-known quilter and embroiderer in the Bay Area, or not the Bay Area, south of the Bay Area, but she taught a workshop. And so I went and took the workshop. I learned how to applique and how to hand quilt. And so that went up on the wall in Jason's room. And nobody was quilting then. Macrame was the big thing. And double knits. People were sewing with double knits and stretch and sew and all of that. But I was teaching home economics at a junior high, and that year they decided I should have boys home ec. They didn't want boys and girls together in class, but just separate. And I had 36 boys. And I'm trying to think of a sewing project for them. And I went to the library and found a book on sewing. It was from the UK, and there were these cushions that just had squares. And I thought, well, they can learn how to cut straight and sew straight, and they'll get a pillow out of it. So that's what they all did, and they were thrilled with it. And of course, they were throwing them around the room. And during that time period, I used to always get Family Circle magazine. That was one of my favorites. And on the cover, there was this log cabin pillow. Someone, I think, had cut up an old quilt, and they made a pillow and it was on a bench. And it just, I was drawn to that, and I saved that. I tore down the magazine, saved it. And it haunted me, because I thought, well, I want to make something like that. And I kept looking at the outside edges. And one day it dawned on me, there's a little square in the center. I'll just sew something to that and just keep going around in a circle. You would have thought I invented log cabin. I was so thrilled with myself. And I can remember talking to the other home ec teacher about it, and she wasn't interested in that kind of thing. But that's when I got interested in patchwork. And people didn't use the word quilting. It was just patchwork. And so the other thing that I did, because at that point I just had one child at that point. I didn't have Valori yet. In order to make things, I always liked doing crafty stuff, but I started just cutting strips and sewing them together. Well, in years and years before that, there was a technique called string piecing. But I didn't know that, and then I found out later. So that was how I really started quilting. And what appealed to me about it is I liked putting different fabrics together. I've always loved that planning part of figuring out what you're gonna do and what's gonna go next to what. And so I started doing adult ed classes in Portland at that time. And then we moved to Sisters, and there weren't any home ec jobs around. And so I went to the community college, and we offered a patchwork class in Sisters, and they got 25 people, and that was when there were 500 people in town. So it was a really big deal. It was the most people ever signed up for a class, so we taught it at the grade school. And but there were no stores in Central Oregon that carried cottons. And I had taught at Daisy Kingdom in Portland, and Pat had started carrying cottons at that time. So I would drive to Portland, and she would give me fabric to then sell to my students. And finally one day she just said, "Jean, you need to open a store." And my comment to her was, "Well, I don't know how to do change." Because I've never had that kind of a job. I'd always had a counselor job, or as a lifeguard. I worked at a restaurant, but I didn't have to do the money. So she said, "I think you can do it." And my retirement, I had taught for 8 years, and I had $3,200. So I cashed it in, and that's what I started the Stitchin Post with. And I can remember there was one supplier in Portland that had notions and like basic kind of fabrics. And then there was a company called VIP Textiles. Some of you have been around know about VIP. And they had cottons, and that's mostly what Pat carried. So she helped me get in touch with them, and I went to Shank in Portland, and Stan, who his daughter now runs Shank, but he's still hanging out kind of like I do. But Jason and Val were crawling around on the shelves and everything while I'm trying to shop. And he reminded me of that when he said, during Quilt Show. And I filled the whole car up with fabric, and that was in the days we had a Ford station wagon and no seatbelts, of course. So I had 2 kids in the front seat with me and all this fabric. So I do remember that. But I think last year, in getting back to what it felt like, it was just kind of one surprise after another of stories that came up, or I would see somebody and they would tell me about being afraid to enter the quilt show, thinking their quilt couldn't get in. And I always wanted it to be for everybody. And as long as I'm still around, I will always push that, because to me, I think everything has value, and everybody is at a different place in whatever they're doing. And the joy for me is when I get to just be an observer on Quilt Show Day, and I see a whole family standing around somebody's first quilt, and they have their whole family come to see it, and that just fills me with a lot of joy. And through the years, I think us being able to access work that in Central Oregon we'd never have the opportunity to see if we didn't approach them and say, we would like to do a special exhibit of this or that. I mean, we get the QuiltCon quilts, but we went for it. And I remember when my friend Betsy Rickles we had both seen the Cheese Bend exhibit in San Francisco at the De Young Museum. And she said, Jean, I think we should just invite him to Quilt Show. I said, well, I don't even know how to get a hold of him. She said, I'll figure it out. Well, she figured it out. And then we had to pay for all of them to come. And so we had to do some giant fundraising, let me tell you. But they came 3 times. Now they're real famous, and they probably wouldn't come here. But we had them when they were really a grassroots organization. And I remember I had them to dinner the first year they were there, and they had always just been, when they were honored, it was at a museum because somebody was hanging their quilts. Well, when we brought them to Sisters, we asked if they'd like to teach a workshop. They'd never been asked to teach a workshop, and they were so excited about it. And my husband was their driver. We had borrowed a van, and he would drive them to and from. Betsy's brother had a house that was a second home that they could stay at. So John would drive them back and forth, and he just heard all kinds of stories. But Valori had, she was pregnant with Vi that year, but Livy was, it would have been pregnant with T, and Livy was 4. And when we sat down for dinner outside on the deck, they break out in song. And it's just beautiful, and it almost gives you the shivers. And as they got ready to leave to go in to do their lecture, Livy ran up and just threw her arms around Lucy and said, I love you, Lucy. And they had never seen a black person before. No, so those things I remember. They didn't happen this year, but I remember a lot of those things. And I think, when we had the program on Friday night and Alex kind of interviewed Val and I, which was making me really nervous. I thought, I don't know what she's going to ask. But I know Alex very well, and it brought back memories to me of the first year she came to Quilt Show, and she had just been hired to do so many quilts on the Home and Garden Network. And she was young, she had a couple of babies, and she had curly perm hair, and she was wearing denim dresses almost to the floor. Very country looking. And so she arrives, and here comes the people they sent from so many quilts, and they had a producer and 2 photographers and another person that was supposed to direct things, and they didn't like the way Alex was dressed. And so they came to me and said, we have to do something about this. Any place that we could get some other clothes for her. Well, I had a friend that had Common Threads. And so I went to Kathy and I said, do you think you could dress Alex for when they film her for the shows? So they did. But then Alex comes to me crying. They're making me wear a really short skirt, and I'm uncomfortable in it. Oh, it was just hilarious. And before Quilt Show, during the week when we had Quilters Affair, we were filming in the store, and she and I would have been standing here, and then the person filming us was over there, and we were showing him how to do something. Here comes this man with his stroller with his dog in it, right between us, right in the middle of filming. So we got to start over, but Alex and I had to laugh about that. So anyway, lots of friendships I've made over the years. People I probably would never have met had I not been involved in quilting. And you just pick up where you left off the last time when you see people. And on Quilt Show Day, that was the joy, was seeing so many people and just being able to visit and say hello. But I have to tell you, I was so exhausted at the end. Totally exhausted. And even afterwards, wrapping up everything, and I had 100 quilts in the show, so you can imagine all that stuff at my house. And once everybody was gone, I made it a point to really sort through things and organize things better than I've had them in the past. So my cat and I did that for a couple weeks, and everybody has a tag on it, and I know where everything is. So anyway, I think that's all I have to say, except Dawn might want to say something about Quilt Show.
Yeah, Dawn, you want to add on?
Well, I have to tell you, in terms of, Quilt Show, we had been doing it for probably 10 years, and it gotten bigger and bigger, where it was hard to find volunteers to do the hard work, which is the registering of everything and keeping track of everything. Volunteers didn't want to do that, so I started paying somebody to do it, and we were lucky. During that time, we met a man, Bryce Hamilton, who was from Wisconsin, and he worked with some Amish women that hand-pieced and hand-quilted quilts, and they sold them. And so he would bring like a dozen to the show, and so then we had money finally to help pay for things. And one year, my husband and I were at the accountants in November looking at where everything was at, and I said to the guy, I just feel I have a tiger by the tail. I'm getting the store ready for Quilt Show, then I'm putting on Quilters Affair, and then I am putting on the Quilt Show, and I just can't do all of it anymore. And he said, well, you need to be a nonprofit. And I said, well, how do you do that? So he helped me create the nonprofit, and then I hired Ann Richardson to be our first director. And then she kind of got poached by Folk Festival. They wanted her, and so then she went over there, and then we had Jeanette for, I think, 4 years, and then Jeanette was ready to be done. And I have to tell you, when the day we were interviewing people for our third director, and Donna Rice was here and I was here, and then our nonprofit advisor, Jan McGowan, was sitting here, and we had our questions lined up, and we're all organized, and in walked Dawn. At the top of my paper, I just wrote, yes. There was something about her that just grabbed me, and I thought she can do it. So.
If only I knew. Just kidding. It's always good to not know what you don't know.
Yeah, but what was so great about her? She had not been a director of a nonprofit, but she had 5 girls. They were all in band, and she organized all those band trips and all of that stuff with 5 kids, and worked at the library, and then she went to college. And she had plenty of experience, we have found. So I'll let Dawn talk to you next.
Thank you, Jean. That's very true. I do have 5 daughters. They're not in marching band anymore. But even after they graduated, I stuck around for a few extra years because my partner in running the competitions, her daughter was 4 years younger than my youngest, and so she said, I helped you, now it's your turn to help me. So, but that really pushed me towards wanting to work in the nonprofit world in an event capacity. But I had a little quilting background. My mom had taught quilting over in Salem for about 30 years and had been bringing a bus to Sisters when I kept going, what is Sisters? Where is Sisters? And so, lo and behold, here I am now, and I absolutely do love what I do. I've learned so much, especially thanks to Jean's leadership and mentorship on helping me along, learning those things that I didn't know, and having lots of fun. So this year's show is very special to be part of helping create this iconic moment for first of all, people who have been here for so long and remember what it was like back in the days when there weren't paid staff and everybody was just jumping in. Even though now there's a paid staff of me and a half-time person, We still have all the volunteers, so thank you to each of you that have stepped up either this last year or in previous years. It's so much fun to get to know people and see everyone enjoying themselves at the show. And this year, a couple of statistics for you. Number one, a lot of you might already know that registration closed 6 weeks after it opened, when normally it's open for almost 3 months. That is because people were excited and people were disappointed when we were like, we are sorry, we maxed out so early. But we also noticed in those statistics how many people were new to putting a quilt in the show, because we can see they have to create an account first. Those of you who have put a quilt in the show, remember, you have to create your database account. And so I kept getting these notifications, and I'm like, oh, there's another new person, and there's another new person. And then we found they were not paying to have their quilts returned to them, which means they were also coming to the show. And so I didn't run numbers on it, but I just thought, oh, this is a year that is just a little different, and how fun to be part of that. We had a great time. I know there was a lot of conversations during Quilters Affair Week, Thursday night, Friday night with Jean. Saturday was a different world. Saturday were all those people, like, how many of you love Disneyland? And when Mickey's there, you got to take your picture with Mickey. You're not saying Jean is Mickey, but everybody wanted a picture with Jean. And there were so many people I know that she wasn't familiar with, but think of that as her reach of influence. It is people who have watched her online, people who have done her books, learned that way without ever meeting her in person, and they all wanted to make sure. And we tried to give her a few moments of not having to be in everyone's photos, and we snuck over and did a little one-on-one interview, and the kids actually, my kids do the social media for us, and they actually had like a little rope roped off to kind of keep it. We were like, oh, okay, this is great.
And we were in the shade.
And we were in the shade on top of it, and had chairs, and it was so fun, which I need to remember to get that on the website. So if anybody reminds me, I can grab that and put that up there for everybody. But yeah, it just really is amazing to not only have been looking forward to this golden anniversary, but then what comes next. And when Jean and I started having that conversation in the fall, I said, I think we need to gather together with some of our key volunteers and our board members, and let's just throw ideas out there, because why not dream big, and then we can always rein it back in if we need to. But sometimes those ideas will spark future ideas also, which is so fun. And again, I think we were just talking a little bit ago, Jean has never said this is the way it's always done. And as a quilt teacher, as a store owner, and also as a founder of a nonprofit, it is huge not to have founder syndrome, that you're not willing to. That's what they call
Well,
it.
if I get that, you can
I'll
just
let you know.
tell me goodbye.
I'll let you know. Never say goodbye, no. But yeah, definitely. The other thing that Jean just shared, and I know the board feels the same way I do, so as long as we're still here and way down the road, or we'll have it in writing in the bylaws, the show will always be free to attend. And the show will always be non-jury, because number one, who wants to be a judge of quilts? Right. Not any of us. Well, maybe some of you. But we don't have quilt police, and we don't have quilt judging, and we love the fact that we can welcome every level of quilter into the show. So a couple of other things I want to share with you real quick. Yes, we have the amazing Sisters, 5 Decades of Quilting in America. If you have not gotten your copy, I do know that the Stitchin Post still has them available. And then the other thing I want to touch on real quick, because I have to do this as part of my job. But one of the things I just talked about is the fact that this show is always free to attend and always will be, but it does cost to put it on. So an example, $1,600 for some traffic signs that we have to rent to keep everybody safe when they're crossing the streets. We have to pay for porta potties. We have to pay for a permit to the city to be able to just have the event. So all those things, plus to pay me to keep answering phones in the office. But if you have not ever become a friend of the show, and that's what we call it, I or Jean are more than happy, or Kumi, more than happy to talk to you about it. If you have questions on our finances, because we're nonprofit, we're very open about that. But there's always little perks that come with being a friend of the show, like priority seating during the Thursday and Friday night events that happen at the high school, or little 2026 show stickers that you might want to you get in your hand on for your water bottle. So, or your sewing machine. Apparently that's a thing too. I need to get some stickers for my machine. But we do encourage you to support us in that. And again, because we are a nonprofit, it's potentially tax deductible, but check with your tax consultant first. And I can't promise all that. But yeah, so that's part of what we do too, because again, we will always be free, and after 50 years, we think we're doing something right, and we hope to continue on that path.
Thank
So,
you.
that's it for me.